Hey everybody, this is Some Patches Required. My name is Zach Frank.
And my name is Aaron Demana. I would like to welcome our millions and millions of listeners to yet another incredible episode of this well-known podcast.
Oh, we're well known now, and the millions and millions.
Yes, both of them.
I thought we discussed one or two, but I guess pressure's on.
Yes, millions and millions and well-known. We have a large readership, which is what you do with a podcast.
We get a YouTube button for that, right?
I think we get like 2 YouTube buttons for that, actually.
Oh, nice. I look forward to those being mailed to us immediately.
I will disinfect it soon.
We'll disinfect. I guess that's fair. We are in COVID times, so I guess that dates it. I wonder what this will be like a year from now. Maybe we'll still be in those times. But before we rant, as we inevitably will, what the heck is this podcast about, Aaron?
Yeah, so this podcast is about the video games industry at large. Both Zach and I are enthusiasts and semi-participants in it. We both worked on games during college, during our time at Ohio University, and we both have some very strong opinions about pretty much everything in there. My main focus up to this point has been criticism and, discussing what makes games work and what makes games good, why I like them, why other people may like them when I don't, other things that are subjective. And Zach, your focus has been?
Well, so Aaron, I'll help you. It's games journalism. Aaron is in games journalism.
I was trying to avoid that specific term because at the moment it's aspirational, but
fair enough. But I'll give him the credit. Aaron has done quite a bit of games journalism and reviews in the past. So I will talk you up a little bit there, bud. And I just realized I called you Bud. I hate when people call me Bud, so I apologize. But per your point,
Slugger.
Oh God. Well, here comes the cringe. To your point, I've got a background, actually major not at all in game development, but I did 3D modeling during college and very quickly learned that, it's really cool to make that stuff, but it is not my burning passion. I actually am very interested in project management and specifically production side of things. So that's typically where some of our stuff will skew, or some of my stuff will skew specifically. And really what the point of today's episode is, we don't have a specific topic in mind, but what we do have is kind of, why does this podcast exist? What are some of the topics that we cared about? I'm sure there'll be other episodes on these topics that come up, but that's just generally what we're going to focus on. So I think maybe a good way to start this next section off is why are we called Some Patches Required? I'll throw it back to you, Aaron. I'm sure that we have the same idea. I mean, we came up with the name together, but yes. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, despite the fact that this introduction has sounded like it has, there was a lengthy discussion about this particular aspect. And it is because on the surface, obviously, patching a game is something that most current gamers are familiar with. You buy a game, you have to download a day one patch. And then inevitably, journalistic sources release information about upcoming patches that fix glitches or add content or whatever. And we thought that was an apt metaphor for the gaming industry at large, where the entire ecosphere there is to some extent complete, but could require a lot of work in a great many areas, specifically the way that employees are treated, the way that timelines are laid out, the way that any of that information is communicated to consumers in a way that makes them not extremely salty. And also, we are entirely convinced that, and I'm sure by this point, you, our millions and millions of listeners, are too, convinced that this podcast could require a fair amount of work because nothing is ever done. It's always a process. So
It's a
some
living
patches are always going to
document,
be required.
just like
Yeah,
the Constitution.
exactly. Yeah,
They're still working on that.
I mean, I suppose this podcast applies more to the living document idea because there's always improvements to be made. There's always things we could be doing better. There's more, relevant topics we could talk about. There's less that we could ramble, such as I am doing right now. But yeah, there's a lot of ways that the video games industry, which is something that so many of us love, myself and Zach included, could be patched to be better for everybody involved, both on the front and back end of that ecosystem. And that's kind of where the idea came from.
Yeah, and to echo off of that, I mean, I'm sure as everyone will see, I have very strong opinions, much as Aaron does, and we agree, I think, on a large amount of things. I'm very interested to learn what we don't agree on, actually. But one quick point: we have a lot of friends. Little flex, no. But we have a lot of friends in the games industry. Humble brag. And because of that, a lot of them are going through different things, crunch. Fortunately, I don't think anyone's going through abuse, so that's good. So one of our things that we're going to talk about today, we don't have, I don't think we have anyone going through firsthand experience, so that's good. But basically, there's a lot of wonderful things, per Aaron's point, about the games industry and the people in it. It's a very accepting group of people. It's a very wonderful group of people. And really what we want to do with this is talk about, how is the sausage made, is the wonderful way that Jim Sterling of the Jimquisition always talks about it. And that may give you an idea of some of my leanings, for those who know who that is. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of the basic premise. Aaron, I think you summed it up pretty well.
Thank you very much. I'll be here all week.
You'll be here all. Well, fair enough. The other thing I am wanting to make sure that we address as well before I forget is that we do realize that a lot of these issues that we will be talking about are not only in the games industry. So I guess I'll just hit them on the head. I mean, the things that we're going to be talking about today are just kind of like the three big points that we discussed when talking last week. One of them being crunch, one of them being employee abuse, and then the last one just dealing with job security. So we'll talk a little bit about that stuff. Obviously, all of that, especially now in COVID, impacts everybody. It's not specific to the game industry, but in games, there are things, well, actually, it's games and entertainment. There are things that are unique and not necessarily in every other industry. Like, for example, the main industry that I'm currently in like software. So just wanted to bring that up. Obviously, some of this stuff is transferable. But we're just going to focus on the games aspect for now and when we're discussing these next points. Do you have anything to add, Aaron?
No, I think you summed that up pretty well. I think that anything that we say where we happen to omit an industry that is also undergoing these particular issues, we did not omit due to ignorance, but more due to the fact that our focus is on the games industry. So it's not meant to diminish anyone else's issues. It's just trying to keep things concise as best we possibly can.
And I think that's probably a topic that'll pop up in some future episodes. And actually in our practice run, I think in a certain way kind of appeared.
It did.
It did. So we're probably just gonna jump right into the big fun one, Aaron. The big C word. Crunch. So I specifically put in here something about Anthem and the BioWare situation, and the beauty of BioWare magic. But more specifically, I personally think crunch is a huge issue in the games industry. What do you think, Aaron?
I think crunch is great, Zach. I love it, and I love the way that it hurts people to make me happy.
We're not talking about crunch bars, to clarify.
Beans. But they've got little rice flakes in them. No, I think that crunch is something that anybody tuned into the games industry is woefully aware of. Which becomes even more depressing considering how long we've been woefully aware of it. But for so many people, it just kind of skims right off. It rolls off like water on a duck's back. it's like, oh, that sucks.
Well, I think too, like one of the big things that isn't BioWare or BioWare Magic related that we did talk about in our one practice run is, the idea that, or sorry, take that back. Cyberpunk, right? 2077 had a couple pushbacks. A lot of the reason behind that, supposedly to some degree, was to not have too horrible of a crunch. There were some other issues with, all the next gen consoles coming out and making sure that all the different versions were up to date so it could run effectively, all of that fun. But in general, some of that did have to do with crunch. And there definitely is, an opinion, I think, out there that it's like, oh, well, these people are doing like this dream job. This is a common thing. And it touches on all these different points that we'll talk about today. But it's like, well, making video games is a dream job. I don't feel bad for this person if they're crunching, what was it? I think it was 18 hours. I'd have to go look back at the document, but I know when I did the math, I mean, basically you're working like at least 16-hour days. So it's like you sleep and then you go to work. And
so, yes, I believe that was the correct thing. And I mean, like, dialing that back a bit, it's not specific to one studio, but Cyberpunk is such a huge thing right now that when it got delayed, people were up in flames about it. And before it got delayed, people were worried about more delays, and there were reports coming out about crunch a little bit. And yeah, people were working 16 or 18-hour days, and the company mandated 6-day work weeks, even after saying that they wouldn't do anything of the sort.
Well, I think like another big point of that too, that people forget when it comes to crunch is just like the toll that it can have on so one, in the BioWare example, there's stress leave, which I know that we've talked about, which is just in my understanding. So this is coming from Jessica Condit at Engadget. And all the links to anything that we reference in terms of like the actual author for specific articles, we'll do our best to have that in the details. But this is something that is referenced, I believe, in quite a few articles, this idea of stress leave. And that's just ridiculous. At least in the BioWare example, that people are working so much that they've got specific terms for people burning out, basically. Like that to me is incredibly crazy.
Like, and that leads back to something that you and I have spoken about before, where you, as a person who has so much experience and like interest in project management, is that you've seen the game industry use crunch as a managerial tool, as just another part of the timeline. Like, there's development, well, there's pre-pro, there's development, and then there's crunch, and it just has to be part of it.
Yeah. Well, so it is interesting it's interesting that it's a tool, because I think it's widely considered. I believe it's also in Jessica's article that she specifically references that crunch is a failure of planning. So it's interesting that it is constantly used. In project management, people work overtime. That's certainly a thing. I would be, dumb for saying that it's not. But to the degree that people crunch, which sometimes it's years, I believe in the Anthem example, I mean, I believe they were in pre-production up until a year before the game came out, basically, and they only had a year of production. So I'm assuming, and I'd have to dig through that article, but that's an entire year of crunch in that example, right? And some examples it may be even worse. So it's just crazy in comparison to when you look at a lot of like project management. It may be like, yes, you're working overtime for a couple days, or maybe even a month, and a month is a lot of time. But the problem with overworking is not only, one, do you have issues like the stress leave situation, but I mean, there's like tons of different studies that show once you start working over 8 hours, your productivity actually goes down pretty drastically. And that's why you've got these ideas of like the 3-day work week and all these other things coming up. And it's basically just suggesting, we don't work the same way we used to. And so it doesn't make sense for us to work as much as maybe we used to before, and you may be more efficient. I know, certainly, I hope my job isn't listening to this, but I am not glued in working 8 hours a day. There is time spent socializing and doing some slight, other deviations just to help keep your sanity during the day.
Yeah, I mean, I as a quarantine boy,
That makes it sound like you were like birthed during quarantine.
I suppose it does. I mean, as a current
I'm actually
quarantine
1 year
boy,
old.
I am. Yeah, this is okay. Episode 1 revelation. This is the Shyamalan twist. The twist comes at the beginning. I was born 3 days ago.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, and this is what my voice sounds like. No, but I was gonna say, as a quarantine boy, it makes me that gives me a moment to reflect on that, because I'm not seeing people. I'm not going out and doing things. I'm, maybe interacting with people online, maybe, calling my family, or I
The
mean those
awkward
two
Zoom
things.
Thanksgiving calls. Yeah.
Basically those things. But the other half of the time I'm either working or playing, well, not half, that's very generous, but the rest of the time I'm playing video games, or I'm playing video games with friends, or I'm working. So yeah, there does need to be a work-life balance. And to your earlier point, I think one of my favorite examples, which you and I have spoken about before, was Bruce Straley, who used to work at Naughty Dog, and was one of the co-directors on Uncharted 4. And the degree to which crunch was not mandated, but culturally encouraged,
Yeah.
based on what I read in Jason Schreier's phenomenal book Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. Um,
Which I
he
still need to
he
read.
it's exceptional. Once I can get out of quarantine and get my copy of the book, I will mail it to you. But and then just spray it with Lysol or something. But he basically lived at the studio, and eventually the commute time between his family home and the office was so much and too insurmountable, and too much of a detriment to the timeline that the game needed him to work hard on it, that he had to get a second apartment. And it's no surprise that he, jumped ship right after the game launched. He just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't have done it for as long as he did. I would have had to take stress leave.
Yeah, no, I mean does he, and just to like hit home on this one point, does he have like a family? Like does he have like a wife and kids and that kind of a thing? Or, well, we may not know, but if he did, I couldn't imagine that the family's too happy that dad or husband has a away from home where he's basically living for
work.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. That's crazy. I think a funny example that I just heard that's related, a mutual friend of ours, that, details don't matter, but I was with them for, what was it? I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And, they made a comment about how, so their partner, sorry, I'm just like realizing the setup of this is really messed up. So their partner worked at the studio that they used to work at. And so they met each other there, and we were talking about dating or something like that. And basically this whole crunch thing came up, and they were joking about how if they expect you to not date in the office, they shouldn't hold you there the whole day, basically, 16 hours. Like, how do you expect coworkers not to, they just said, this is not a PG-13 podcast. We're just going straight rated R right here. How do you expect coworkers not to fuck if they're constantly stuck with each other? And like, as much as I wish game developers, I guess, were like bastions of purity and abstinence, which I definitely don't wish that upon anyone. I'm sorry, born again Christians. That's ridiculous. Like, that leads to a whole other bunch of issues potentially. But I just thought that was such a funny example, and kind of like is telling based on your point. Like, they have to basically form all these like relationships you normally outside of work because they work so long.
Yeah, I mean, if you live at work, then you don't
fuck at work.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you well, maybe not at work, but like
outside the door.
Yeah, well, somewhere where you can get away with it. But if you live at work, I mean, this is a good episode. How's this episode going, do you think? um, if you live at work, your life is at work, and
Yeah.
I don't personally have any problem with inter work relationships. My rule has always been it's okay to date someone if they want to date you.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if you work together. Who cares? I have two coworkers who got married earlier this year.
Mhm.
They basically absconded because there was no functional way to get married in public during the Rona times.
Mhm.
But they got married and they work together at my company. Like, that's fine. That's fantastic. And it's rad. But my company also doesn't mandate 150-hour, 175-hour, 2,000-hour work weeks. I know that's
Oh God, the
physically, mentally,
2000 work
mathematically
hour.
impossible, but
That's that quantum shit where they like send you to the quantum realm to also do work.
that would be, I actually would be able to use that every now and again, but that's beside the point. Yeah, but regardless, I think we've enunciated our qualms with crunch in a vague and yet somehow specific way. Um, and
Well, I
that's
think sorry, but the one thing before we do jump off onto another thing that I do want to hit on, because I feel like we tiptoed around it and then I went on a rant, is that so you're talking about mandatory versus not mandatory. And I just wanted to say, like, even if something is not mandatory, if it's in the culture, per your point, it's
yes.
basically mandatory. You
Mhm.
basically get thrown a crap ton of shade if you don't do it. And if you don't understand that, like if what we're saying or what I'm saying in terms of that is something that like you don't understand, what I would do is invite you to like read some of the articles talking about crunch. Jason Schreier has plenty of them, and
Yeah.
they go through firsthand accounts of how socially stressful that is in a work environment where there's this expectation. And then they basically can say, oh, well, we don't mandatory, we're not holding a gun to your head, is the example that's constantly used.
But even as someone who doesn't work in a workplace environment that mandates something like that, knowing that, like, if I see a bunch of people late in the office and I still have work to do, even if I
Yep.
feel like I can, and this is showing my privilege, even if I feel like I can get the work done the next day, I
Mhm.
feel pressure to stay there. And the nature of my work is completely different than the nature of somebody working on The Last of Us Part Two.
Yeah. It's like you don't leave before your boss kind of a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
except
Yeah. There's
maybe
that vibe.
in
Yeah.
this case, your boss is everybody. And
Or your, yeah, coworkers.
if that culture is there, then yeah, it's not a vocalized mandate. It's not in the employee workbook, but it's it's still there to some extent, and that can be enormously stressful and enormously detrimental to a lot of people's home lives, social lives, mental health,
Mhm.
work life, productivity, all that stuff. So, yes, crunch and bad.
Yeah. Definitely not ideal. And then, so sorry for tangenting you at the end. It sounds like you were going to introduce the next subject that we hinted to earlier.
Yeah, generally we were going to talk about something which I think is potentially the most not explicitly tied to one industry
Mhm.
issue that we find to be very, very worthy of note is employee abuse of almost all different kinds.
Yeah.
Be it, I mean, financial is one thing, but certainly sexism, sexual abuse, gender discrimination, racial discrimination, basically any type of employee abuse, verbal
Yeah.
abuse.
I think that is an interesting one because when I'm just like looking over the notes, definitely, yeah. So sexism, sexual abuse, racism, that kind of thing, probably largely a cultural issue. So you're probably going to see a lot of that everywhere. I think that kind of to our one point earlier, and now that I'm thinking about it, employee abuse and job security really kind of intertwine a lot in the way that at least I think about it. But
I would agree with that.
yeah, and I'm just realizing that now. So if these kind of just blend into each other, I think that's perfectly fine. But the one point that we hit on earlier, Aaron, is the whole, oh, you're this is your like dream job. This like I don't really know the good way to put it, but there's basically like an infinite number of people that can take your job if you're in the games industry, or at least they'll say that until you're a senior level, and then they'll hold that over your head. And then if you have any complaints, it's an easy way to just quell complaints and that kind of a thing. Obviously, I'm making some pretty big generalizations when I say the games industry, because, you know, it's not the whole games industry. It's specific managers, leads, specific companies. It's not an issue everywhere, but that's kind of what we're talking about as being specific, at least when I think of it.
No, I completely agree. And I think, like, obviously the way that abuse manifests is different. It can take many different forms, and the way that it impacts people can take a lot of different forms. But I mean, even if you just look at, and not to be sorry, I'm going to cut this part out, but my cat was just trying to knock over my boom arm. No, just look back at the Roger Ailes sexual abuse scandals, and even watch that movie with Margot Robbie and Charlize Theron, where they basically, I mean, like, Roger Ailes, a complete awful human being, manipulated people who wanted nothing more than to work either specifically for Fox News or specifically for a major news publication.
Yeah.
Manipulated, they took that desire and used it for their own benefit. And that, to me, regardless of what that manipulation turns into, is abuse.
Yeah.
If that means I, the director of Game Studio X, am going to offer you the job that you've been wanting, but I will be paying you a quarter of what you're worth, that's abuse. If they say, I'm going to do that, but we're going to require you in some form or another to work 160-hour work weeks, which is, again, not a real thing, but just a random ass number that I pulled out, then that's abuse. If it's, we're going to kind of string you along for a while on a temp position and then let you go once we're done with you, like once your manpower is no longer needed, then that's abuse.
Yeah. And that's a really annoying. So these are just going to merge. I'm just merging them. Job security is going to merge into employee abuse. It's basically kind of a very similar thing. And I, from my perspective, I just can't see separating them at this point. But, you know, there's plenty, for those that don't know, a lot of large publishers or studios have massive contract teams. So people that are not part of that organization. And we know plenty of people that are on contracts. Some contracts are more beneficial than others. It just depends on the company, right? But some companies, as I think you were hinting, Aaron, will hire massive teams. And the nice thing about contract is you don't have to pay them. You don't have to buy or pay into their 401k. You don't have to give them benefits. And then when the project's done, you just fire them. And, you know, okay, so to a degree, that's a business need. It's, you know, makes sense if that's kind of what the company has to do. But at large, I think there's this like massive reliance on contract, especially within the games industry. And you know, I'm gonna actually jump to something about job security. But I mean, the games industry is this massive multi-billion-dollar machine, and it's only getting bigger at this point, especially if you look at like mobile. Mobile brings in so much money. I don't know the specific numbers, but it's ridiculous. And so, you know, just pulling a number out from a note that I had in 2018, Activision Blizzard made $7.5 billion with a $1.8 billion profit. Like, these are massive companies. They're making tons of money. And in the case of Activision Blizzard, the CEO gets paid an exorbitant amount of money, even by CEO standards. I mean, this isn't me just saying it. You can look it up. There's things well that talk about it. Bobby Kotick gets paid very well. And so, you know, the idea that you can't have less contract workers, or I can't pay these people or give them benefits or all these other things, it's just a little bit, depending on the context of the company, is a little bit absurd. And like I said, some companies are better at it than others. Some companies treat the contract as like a onboarding program, which can be good if it gets you a position. But to your point, that's something that I'm not sure a lot of people realize, is that even when you're quote unquote working for a company, it's still kind of like a freelance hustle.
And there's this expectation of that extends to all forms of abuse within the workplace, I think. Well, maybe not all, but extends to many forms of workplace abuse. That is prove your worth.
Yeah.
Prove your work. Prove that you're worthy of this dream job that you want. We know you want this now. Prove you've earned it. And maybe that means that Matt Lauer presses a terrifying button and ruins a significant portion of your life. Maybe it means that you live in poverty for 2 years and then get the job. Maybe it means that you live in poverty for 2 years and then they just let you go after you crunched. But the prove your worth aspect of it, I don't think should be a factor. I just think that that's a really busted way of looking at an endeavor. Like, if they're not worthy of it, why did you hire them? If it's an extended interview process, then you can communicate that to them up front and say, like, yeah, we're, giving this a run, and if the game does well and if we, think that you're a good fit for the team at the end of this, then heck yeah, you're on.
Yeah.
But leaving someone flapping in the wind after telling their family that they just got the big job, then that's just awful.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing to talk about differences, or at least I will admit that I've had pretty lavish jobs. I haven't had to work retail or fast food, anything like that. So like, I've quote
I
unquote
envy
had
you.
cushy jobs. Yeah,
I
I realize I skipped that part of my life, fortunately.
I've done more than enough retail work in my life. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I hear that a lot, believe it or not. But where I'm going with this is at least for all the jobs that I've had, you're hired on because you have the skills, or there's something that they see in you. It's not we're going to hire you on and then we prove, to your point, you prove that you're worth the job. It's you're worth the job until you prove otherwise, kind of a situation. And I think it's really interesting because that kind of ties into another big change. And I didn't put this on here, so there's nothing to really look at in case you look for it, Aaron. But it's the idea that I don't think games does as much training sometimes as other industries. I think there tends to be a larger expectation that you come in with the skills and then they don't have to teach you. They want to save that money. And I get it to a degree, but like there's no other, okay, I don't want to say that. There are not a lot of like normal corporate jobs that are that way. For example, I started in sales and I got trained 100%. No background in sales. Obviously, sales isn't hyper technical, but then from sales, I moved into a different position, which was more technical. Same thing, training, right? And so it's like this investment from the company and their workers. I feel like that doesn't happen at a lot of these game studios sometimes. And again, not all game studios. Game studios are different. They're all different entities. But I feel like that is a thing that I've seen because a lot of the entry level roles, even, and I'm sure that you've seen this, Aaron, it says like 3 to 4 years experience on there. You don't really see that with entry level roles at like corporate jobs.
Yeah, I mean, on a personal level, trying to break into professional games journalism rather than self-funded and self-promoted games journalism, I can definitely commiserate with the games industry, not the games industry, but the people trying to break into the games industry a little bit, because my degree was in game design, but then I decided I would rather write in English than C sharp. And so I started writing a lot more. And that's currently what I'm employed to do, is write. So I was self-trained in that respect, but the jobs that I've been interested in for a great deal of time in the games journalism sphere require, X number of years at an established publishing company or an established, whatever. And I'm like, well, I can't get that because I don't have that. I can't get in there because I didn't have it. Like, I don't have those. How am I supposed to get the experience unless you give me the experience?
Yeah.
You know, I can write. Is it not worth, maybe training people a little bit more?
Well, no, I mean, I think that's a valid point, though. I mean, and the one thing to kind of clarify, because I think it can sound like complaining, it's not just that. I think that there are valid times to use pre-trained people in certain circumstances. I just think in comparison, the games industry has, if and you can look at this going online. A lot of the permanent roles are for or higher level and lead roles. There's not very many entry level roles, and those entry level roles that do exist are typically contract. And so what it leads to is there's I mean, it's what is it? Supply and demand, right? It's classic supply and demand. My main gripe with it is just I think that there could be a better and less abusive way of kind of entering people into the games industry than making them contract, not giving them benefits, all of these other things, and focusing all of, the funds and energies into these leads that ultimately already know what they're doing in a lot of ways. And I think it's could potentially lead to a very interesting problem where you're not kind of cycling or circulating people enough. And I think we might actually run into that soon, Aaron. I've kind of noticed just kind of by talking to people that we both mutually know, a lot of people in games are old. Like there's a lot of old people in games because people, when they're solidified, if they don't get burned out, they tend to stay at the same place because they don't want to change things up too much unless it's for a big pay raise or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious if at some point we'll end up having a massive lack of talent because people aren't being brought in and taught by these studios. And the only way to really learn is purely by yourself, which, to be fair, I am very much a proponent of self-education. I think, if you're listening to this and you're interested in games, that is the best way to get in. You're going to have to show some dedication on your side. You can't just go in and expect them to teach you everything. That's not going to happen. But that's kind of, I think, my big gripe with it is I do feel like they could invest some more and some of their lower level people and, possibly have some better practices of bringing people in.
I totally agree with that. I think that again, not to make it just, I mean, yes, we'll focus on the games industry for this one. Yes. Yeah, it's hard to get in there because everyone wants to be in the games industry. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people want to be in the games industry. And the games industry doesn't have necessarily enough jobs to accommodate all of those people. But yeah, I think that there could definitely be a lot more resources, be it on the college level or, in terms of studios or publishers, higher ups being willing to hire not 5-year experienced people to positions and then, adjusting their timelines appropriately to give those people, like, put an investment in an employee.
Yeah, definitely. And I think all of this ties into kind of our initial point to kind of get away from the get breaking in side of it and get to the people that are already in. Like, let's say that all of these different problems that you went through, you overcome them, and fantastic. We've had plenty of friends that have done that, getting into various positions, right? And let's say that happens. You get your big break. And you get your entry level producer job, QA job, art job, whatever it may be, right? Programming.
Yeah.
That makes it so much harder for you to have any leverage in that business relationship. Because you struggled so much and you remember all of the pain and the anxiety getting there. So when someone tries to, for lack of a better way of putting it, whip you around or shackle you to your desk or whatever it is, it's much harder to see your self-worth because you went through literal hell to get this one job. And another really common thing is I think there's a ton of imposter syndrome.
In any creative industry.
Yeah. And so all of that together, like, is just kind of manipulated and abused sometimes to really hurt workers. And I've said this multiple times, but I just really want to articulate, not an issue everywhere, but definitely something that you'll hear about consistently if you look into, quote unquote, how the sausage is made kind of a thing. So
yeah, no, I think that's completely valid. And I think that manipulation that you're talking about leads to so much of the abuse, which is like what we've seen at a couple of months ago at Ubisoft with the sexism and sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And what we've seen at, countless other studios, not just in the games industry, but in the film industry and in, even go back to not that this was that long ago, but go to the high profile one like Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a person in power manipulating someone who just wants to advance their career in an industry that it's really hard to advance their career in.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for ending that sentence in a preposition, but
No,
that's
it's ridiculous. Yeah.
it's a systemic issue that doesn't just affect the games industry. It infects the entire workforce, but it seems to be a lot more prevalent, if not at least more covered in the entertainment industry.
Well, yeah, it's to your point, any industry where there's a desire to get in is what it is. So,
Yeah.
if we wanted to expand it in that way, it's just easier to say entertainment because people typically look at that as like cushy jobs or like dream jobs. But yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. I even know someone who they went up the corporate side at a studio, not a game studio, a film studio, and they're I forgot who they worked for, but they worked for some like big director, C-level type of person, right? And basically being their assistant was this big honor because it meant you would probably get promoted and become a big shot at some point if you could deal with it. And the person was just insane. I mean, this an alumni actually of our organization had their hands stapled. They were physically harmed by by their boss with a
That is
stapler,
horrifying.
and they put up with it because it was what you were told to do. You were told to tough it out. That was part of the process. Was it you were expected to suffer. It's like the artists suffer for their work kind of thing. It's just, I not that I think there's no value behind that, but at the same time, like it's just ridiculous.
Well,
like no one should be stapling your hand for you to get.
Yeah, and I want to just provide some clarity to your point. You're not saying that there's a value to someone forcing you to suffer for your art, and there's not a value to your killing yourself for your art. There's value to working really, really hard at your
Yeah.
art.
Mm-hmm.
But to also reiterate your point, yo, that's wild.
Yeah, no, the stapler.
And
Stapled
also
hand.
criminal.
Yeah, no, also probably a little bit.
Well, not a little bit. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that if I went to Kroger and said, "Could I have one of those very fun I went Krogering stickers?" and then they stapled it to my hand, I would call the police.
That would be that'd definitely be a very interesting interaction to have with a Kroger employee.
Yeah,
For
but
those that
wouldn't
don't know,
it be?
Kroger's a grocery store. I feel like it's everywhere, but we don't have one here where I live, so who
But
knows?
okay, let's say general grocery store. But would not general grocery store person stapling anything to any part of you not be as equally, if not considerably less buck wild than your boss doing it to you?
No, yeah, no, I would
That's
assume in that
wild.
situation you're so like destroyed physically and mentally from like having such an awful boss that getting your hand stapled is like maybe some kind of like I don't know. It's like at
It's
least I still
Thursday.
feel at least I'm feeling today. She's beaten me down so much. I enjoy when she shows any kind of emotion. I don't know. I mean, obviously I'm making light of the situation, but in reality it's very messed up per Aaron's point. You shouldn't be doing that. And
Or
I
should
mean,
you
it's
have to
unforgivable.
deal with that?
No, I mean, you shouldn't. I would be curious how many people have been stapled by their boss. Hopefully not very many. So, uh
I mean,
I
before
guess we
before
may
we
know.
had this exact conversation, my hope would have been a none.
And
But
then
now my hope is a minimum of one, but my expectation is no longer that low.
yeah.
Yeah, man. But Beans, you done got me all fucked up with that one. I didn't even know that story.
Yeah, no, we hadn't discussed that. It just kind of, it appeared. It coalesced. I
Indeed.
think that's the right use of that word. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, but other than that, I mean, I think the long and rambling episode that this has been is basically just meant to serve the point that we're less interested in talking about how good Immortals Phoenix Rising is than we are talking about, what went on behind the scenes as far as we can tell, and what that means for us as consumers and what that means for the human beings making that art.
Definitely.
I'm looking forward to Cyberpunk 2077, but there's going to be a moral reckoning for me. when I need to, sit down and enjoy what is hopefully going to be a very good game that certainly came at the expense of a great many hours of developers' personal lives.
You're gonna
And
like cut open that packaging, and then the weight of like millions of people that worked on it is just gonna like press on you. Or not millions, they don't have millions of employees, but thousands.
No, but yeah, I mean essentially it's just like, that's these are the kind of topics that we are interested in talking about. Um, and I do hope that you will forgive any glitches in our conversation, if you will, during this, our first episode.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think exactly what you said as we kind of finish up here. There's definitely way more that we can talk about on each of these subjects. Mainly the main purpose of this was to kind of articulate where we're coming from on certain things and introduce ourselves. We'll typically have more topic driven discussions on further episodes. So in some ways, they'll be a little bit more structured. In other ways, completely not. As I'm
Almost
sure,
certainly.
yeah, as I'm sure some people could tell. But I think to the earlier comment, how's the sausage made? We want to help educate people on that. There's already some YouTube channels, some podcasts, I'm sure, that talk about that, but I think it's important to really let consumers know what goes into things that they are consuming, even if it's not food. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the main thing. Also, I mean, there's just other things that I think the consumer side doesn't understand about game developers. And obviously, we may not understand everything, but being in the environment that we're in, we have a unique perspective of listening to a lot of our friends that it feels like everyone I know, honestly, sometimes is in game dev, which is weird because it was not that way 4 years ago. It's this kind of thing where you have like an opinion on a certain thing as a consumer, and then you bring it up and developers have a completely different opinion. And so that's kind of what we're looking to bring forward, have discussions about. And yeah, we may do some of the kind of more fun reviewy stuff, who knows, at some point, but definitely not the main focus.
Yeah, I mean, every now and again it'll get weird, and we'll just talk about, I don't know, something random, game dev or game industry related. But at the moment, we just kind of wanted to give you, our millions of listeners who already know what we're talking about, clearly, an idea of where we're trying to take this, and introduce ourselves, like Zach just said, and say hi, and hopefully you'll tune in again.
Exactly. And then,
And then
I
on
think
that,
you were going to try to beat me to it.
Beans, I was going to say, on that note, I would like to extend a sincere thank you to Beach Girl for providing our absolutely rad intro and outro music.
I agree.
Yes.
I didn't know how to add on to that one. Yeah, no, thank you so much, Beach Girl. It's absolutely fantastic. We will have a link to their Spotify in the details.
Yes, and feel free to check them out. I believe they will have more work coming out in the near future. They do actually have a standalone little single called Sad and Alone, spelled Sadnalone, which absolutely slaps. So you can check that out right now.
No physical
And
slapping. You don't have to worry about physically being abused. Don't
no,
worry.
there's no physical, unless you want to like give a good knee slap, or
Oh, a good knee slap. I didn't mean to
yeah.
make it quiet with that comment. I feel like I broke you temporarily.
You did. I was like, I mean, like, I was like, or you could slap, as long as the whatever you're slapping, make
Whatever
sure
you're
it's okay with
slapping,
being
it's
slapped.
consensual. The
Yes,
consensual
consensual
slappers.
slapping. But Sad and Alone absolutely slaps. And that is Beach Girl's most recent single. And eventually a full version of our theme song will be available from Beach Girl. I do
We
not
don't
know
know what
as
it's going
of
to
the
be
date.
called. We
I do
don't,
not know. I do not know the title of it at the moment, and I
or the
do not
date.
know the date that it will be published. But it will be there, and we will let you know at some point when it is. But right now, you can check them out on Spotify and give them some love.
And secondly, we've got our wonderful friend, Amelia Douglas, who helped us with our icon and also coming up with colors. She was a fantastic resource. You can support her if you're at all interested by going to Instagram at edougieart or by going to her Etsy page under the same name. Like I said, we'll make sure to have links to all of this in the description down below or wherever it goes, because I'm gonna be honest, first episode, I have no idea where all the stuff goes. I watch a lot of YouTube. So hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. I don't think this applies to anything that we're doing, but yes.
Call your representatives.
Oh, are you trying to like campaign now?
Yeah, I was just trying to come up with something.
Let's not bring that up again.
We just got out of that one. Yeah, no, but yeah, seriously, as I said before, and I'm going to continue using this extremely bad and slightly, I just hit my mic, beans. As I said before, if you'll allow me to continue using this extremely bad and probably cheesy version of using the English language, I hope you forgive any glitches that happen to occur during this episode.
We'll make sure to patch them. Oh.
No, that's staying in. But I do hope that you'll join us next time when we discuss something relevant.
Thanks, guys and girls and theys and everyone. I hope that's never mind.
Thanks all. Thank you to all of our millions of listeners.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Have a good night.
Right. Peace.